Welcome to Keep It Local, a podcast of Local Media Association. My name is Ryan Welton, your host, and this is a podcast where I talk to the movers and shakers, the doers and thinkers of the journalism universe. And today's episode is special because I'm interviewing me. I put together a report, an LMII report. I was given the honor of doing so to put together one about the basics of podcasting. So today, in a Keep It Local first, I'm going to be talking to Ryan Welton. Welcome to the show. Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for having me on. So, my first question for you, Ryan, is tell us about your journey, not only how it brought you to Local Media Association, but what prompted the idea for Keep It Local. My journey to Local Media Association came from being a member of Local Media Association through my previous employer, Griffin Media. I had spent almost 8 years there as director of digital content. I largely did the same role with Hearst Television and KOCO just a few years before, and I've spent the better part of the past 2 decades in local news. And when I decided to set off on my own, I took a digital content coordination contract with Local Media Association and have gotten to meet people all across North America in journalism. Many of them I knew when I was a member of LMA, and I'd participate in something called the LMA Digital Club. Shout out Digital Club. It was a great experience, and I'd been to several LMA events before and loved them all. So I was really passionate about what LMA does. And as part of that, I had an idea to start a podcast. And the reason wasn't because I thought a podcast in particular would be something that would be helpful to Local Media Association. The thought was that the podcast could serve as a content pillar. It's sort of a hub and spoke approach. Whenever you're thinking about digital content, you think that one of the pieces of content needs to be your pillar content. And I think about local TV news. That pillar content is the newscast. Everything spokes from that. And of course, there are digital departments who are doing their own things also. But even in the digital world, for many independent creators, it's YouTube or Substack. What is your pillar content? And for Local Media Association, it has largely been whatever is on the website. And so, what I wanted to do was to be creating content that was visual with video, to create content that was oral in nature, audio, and to create content that could be both long form and short form. And really, that's why a podcast in 2026 is particularly appealing. Now, let's talk about the LMII report. It's available for purchase at localmedia.org. If you're a member of Local Media Association and you subscribe to these innovation insights, you can get them for free. But for everybody else, it costs a little bit of money, and it's on the website at localmedia.org. Ryan, tell us, who is this for? What's included in this report, and who is it for exactly? Well, I should note first, Ryan, that anytime that you create something that is supposed to be authoritative, it is easy for imposter syndrome to set in, except for the fact that I had been creating podcasts for a while on my own as part of my Oklahoma Memo project, or for other people. And I had actually recently gone back to school to get a master's in digital audience strategy from Arizona State, and I took actually a pretty renowned podcasting course there with Regina Revazova, where we learned not only the specifics of recording but also how to edit. Now, we will talk about editing in just a little bit, but it just happened to be that I enjoyed the podcast creation and the podcast editing process. But when it came time to put together a report, I wanted it to be less formal, to adapt to my own comfort level, because I don't see myself as an expert. I see myself as somebody who executes tactically. Uh, I understand the big picture of why podcasts are important, but I understand how to get started with them, how to record them, how to make them sound good, and how to do this for and put it together for an audience that really includes anybody. So when you ask, you know, Who is this for exactly? I would say that it could be LMA membership, of course, folks who are leaders in newsrooms, people who are reporters, independent journalists, but frankly, anybody. This is, I think, good advice, good counsel for anybody. And I should note, my goal in creating this ultimately is to help as many LMA members as possible get started. There tends to be a paralysis. I've experienced it in my previous newsroom. There's a tendency to want everything to be perfect before we start. The podcast has to be sold. We need a studio. The fact is, you don't. And I'm going to provide some evidence of that as we go further in the conversation. Let's get down to the nitty gritty, some of the details of producing a podcast, and let's start with audio. What are some of your best tips, your basic tips? What's the secret sauce to getting the very best audio out of every recording? Yeah, let's talk about audio because in the world of podcasting or this long form content that includes video or audio, if you don't feel comfortable calling it a podcast, audio is probably the most important element of the entire production. This video could go in and out. In fact, you see that I'm up against a background, and the fact that you see it sort of fading in and out is not nearly as big a deal to you as if, on the other hand, my audio was really, really poor. That would cause you to churn. Over and over, we find that uh, in the hierarchy of what's important, it's most important to have good audio. So let's just talk about the setup. You notice that I'm wearing headphones. That'll come into play. You don't see it, but there is a Rode Pod Mic USB in front of me. I spent about $200 on it. Amazon, pretty simple. And I've gone through a journey of not having the right microphone. I'm also a musician, so I've got all sorts of microphones in the house. But I remember this from radio TV school back when I was at OU in the early 90s, is that you have omnidirectional mics that pick up sound from everywhere. I've got a Blue Yeti that's omnidirectional, and that's good if you were recording something in person and I had a guest on the other side. But I do most of my recording remotely via Riverside and previously Descript and some other platforms like that. I've even done it from Zoom. And the Rode Pod mic is cardioid. The sound gets picked up from the front. So when I talk into the mic, it's really focused on me right here. And it's just the better mic for me talking and you talking. Now, I'll have many guests who just use their laptop microphone. It works, but it's not as good. There are some tips and tricks that I tell you about in this report where you can take average audio. It sounds like you're in a tunnel. It's not, it's too loud, it's too soft. There is a tool out there that barely costs anything that you can essentially master audio. And it's a tool that I've long predicted might just put audio engineers out of business altogether. I don't want to give everything away, Ryan, that's in the LMII report, but I'll tell you this story. There was a podcast that went top five, not top five in a random niche. I mean, top five nationally. Top five. It was up there with Joe Rogan for a period of time in 2025. And I happen to know both of the gentlemen who were involved with the production, but I asked one of them, so how did you record this? Did the two of you get together in a fancy, this was done for a national news network. So not local, not cable news, national news network. And he said, no, I used my phone. I talked into my phone. The other guy talked into his phone, and it got sent off and it got produced. And I don't know what tool they used, but I'll just tell you the tools that I talk about in this report are the same ones that you and I have access to that will make your audio sound tremendous. But for a best practice, if you're a newsroom and you're doing this remotely, you need a microphone. Don't just rely on the one that's on your laptop. A cardioid microphone picks up from the front. My recommendation is a Rode, RODE, PodMic USB. And also, when you record, wear wired headphones. Wired headphones. Go back, if you're old enough to remember the 70s or the 80s when we had wired headphones all the time, it's just a way for, if I'm on this podcast and you're on this podcast, Ryan, we're both on this together, that I can keep your sound from my sound and my sound from your sound. It just ends up with better audio. But I will tell you, um, you can work around it. I should also note, when I talk about headphones and wired, I don't mean AirPods. AirPods actually produce terrible audio. Now, I hear this question a lot. What about the video? Is this something that you can do on an iPhone, or do you necessarily have to build out a full on studio? That is a great question, Ryan. And, what I would suggest to you is that I can mostly tell you, and I do in the report, how I do it. As with most of podcasting, even the definition of podcasting, there isn't a for sure right answer or wrong answer. In my work with local TV newsrooms, particularly the one that I was employed by for almost 8 years, they really wanted to have a studio built out for it. That's fine. Folks like you and me, folks who work in small newsrooms, don't have that luxury. Maybe you have a background, maybe you sort of arrange your room to look good for a video portion of a podcast. But I would say don't overthink it. Done is better than perfect in this case. The most important part about video is to have good lighting. And in the report, I talk about 3-point lighting and some equipment. In fact, I even show a picture of the studio that I have here at the house. And there is, I've got a box light, I've got a side light, I've got some lights behind me, but it's the good lighting to have sort of some light shining on your face, a little bit lesser light on the side, and then some light behind you to sort of, I don't know that it produces a halo, but it just makes it look fuller. But no, I wouldn't recommend going to the trouble of building a studio unless that's really just what you want to do. I also don't record these things on my iPhone. I prefer the remote recording process, and I'll tell you why. I started using Descript, and I like Descript. It has a good editor tool with it that you can use right there in the platform. But I recorded enough podcasts, even for keep it local here, but I recorded enough podcasts that had just poor enough video and just poor enough audio that I needed to find the platform that has the best of both. And Riverside, no platform is perfect. There are some issues with Riverside, but for the most part, and by a wide margin, Riverside produces the best video and the best audio possible in remote podcast recording situations. And the reason why is that because for me, for you, it's recording on your individual machine, which is why anytime I send a podcast invite out, I always tell folks your machine needs to have good bandwidth, good RAM, just the available memory to do tasks. That's why I don't have anything else open besides this recording right now. It's why I make sure that I have the best Wi-Fi possible because it's being recorded on my machine. And then when you and I record, Ryan, my video goes up to my machine to the cloud. Your video goes up to your machine to the cloud. And it produces, even when we're in a live session recording and the other person sort of, their video goes pixelated or gets garbled and the audio is not perfect, most of the time, Riverside picks up on it, records it, stores it, and it comes out perfect in the end. Anyway, so when you're thinking about video, you want to think about your recording platform. Now, I talked earlier in this episode about imposter syndrome. I'm probably not the guy to help you pick out a DSLR camera or a big real studio setup. I know people who can do that, and there are a lot of folks in the local TV news world who know how to do that. But if I were doing it in person, I would just say both parties, all parties, if there's a 3 or 4 person podcast, need to have their own connection. It could still be run through Riverside. Otherwise, you're setting up cameras and you're doing it more manually, and that's sort of outside of the realm of my specific expertise. But I think for newsrooms who are wanting to get started with podcasts to get off the ground, really you want the easiest solution possible that takes you the least amount of time, that costs you the lowest amount of money, that is sustainable and scalable content wise. And that's why I believe my method is the one that will work best for most newsrooms, which is good computer, good Wi Fi, Riverside, microphone, wired headphones, and record to your heart's content at that point. But in terms of what you can do at home or in the newsroom, it starts with lighting. And it, got a box light, a big one that's on the side here. In fact, this light, I don't know that I mentioned this in the report. I point the nose of it 45 degrees toward my nose. And that's just one of the recommendations I've learned from people who know a lot more about this than I do. And then a soft light here. I do have a ring light up here. It's not necessarily the recommendation, but I like it and it looks better for me. And I've got a couple of Govee lights behind me, Govee, just to add a little bit of color. I think the term for it is that they paint the wall with color. You see that a lot on YouTube. But most of all, don't overthink it. The audio is more important than the video, right? So once you have the audio mastered and you're 80% there. The video, it would be great if it's pretty good. I download these in Riverside at 1080p, and I'll talk about an editing technique that I use to help make it look and sound right. But for the video, again, it's lighting over everything. And yeah, if you're doing this remotely, I do prefer Riverside, but I will tell you, you're not going to go wrong with any of the bigger platforms. This has been great information so far, if I do say so myself. But you mentioned a preference for the Riverside platform. Could you go into a little bit about how you edit your podcasts? And is this a way that everybody else has to follow? Yeah, I do prefer Riverside, and that's just on account of having tried Descript and tried other things, and the quality of the video and the audio is consistently better when taken from Riverside. But by the way, use what works for you. Once I download the video and audio from Riverside, I take it through Handbrake. There are a couple of settings that I use in there to make sure that the words match the mouth. And if you're familiar with Handbrake, and I use a Mac, you bring the video in and you go to a video section, and there's a section there where you can play with the frame rate, and you make the frame rate be constant and then pick a little setting called same as source from a drop down right above it. It's sort of right in the middle of the dashboard, and that will ensure that the video and the audio match. And I just run it through Handbrake one time, and then I bring it into Adobe Premiere Pro. And I talked about some of these extra uh, tools that I mentioned in the LMII report. Again, I don't want to give it away, but I bring it into Adobe Premiere Pro. I extract the audio from the video, and then I master the audio and bring it back into the video. Now, I mentioned Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe is expensive. It costs like more than $50 a month. I would highly recommend experimenting with something free like DaVinci Resolve or whatever tool works for you. Um, as with all of this, nothing I say is sacrosanct. If you find something better that works for you, whether it be for audio, for lighting, for the microphone, for technique, do it. All right, at this point, I presume that you have your podcast completed. What then? Sure. Once you have a podcast that's ready to go, you've downloaded the video as an MP4, you've downloaded the audio as an MP3, and you know, I do tend these days to take the MP3 from my video editor, Adobe Premiere Pro, and bring it into Audition and do some extra things with that. But you do what works for you. At this point, you have a done product, whether it be a conversation with a source, or maybe it's a podcast amongst several of you in the newsroom talking about a topic in the news. Whatever it is, you have a product now. If you have an MP4, you have a video podcast. If you have an MP3, no matter how perfect or imperfect it is, you have an audio podcast. So, what do you do with it then? Well, you need a podcast distribution tool. And yeah, some of those cost money. In fact, they all cost a little something. Uh, for the longest time, I used Captivate. It's Captivate.fm, and it's particularly good in that it integrates a dashboard, a stats dashboard. Most of them do, but it also has a tool for managing your ads. managing pre-roll and mid-roll, and I'll talk about um, sort of expectations for monetizing these things in just a bit. But Captivate.fm is it costs $20 a month. There are a lot of tools like that. Um, the Oklahoma Memo project that I work on, it's a newsletter that I do here in Oklahoma. It's a digital news platform. My podcasting is distributed through Beehive, my Beehive newsletter platform, Beehiiv. You've probably heard of it. Now, when I say distributed, I mean, how do you get the podcast to Apple? How do you get the podcast to Spotify? There is some upfront setup you have to do, especially on Apple. And you'll have to fill out a little form. And usually these tools like Captivate have a walkthrough that makes it pretty easy for you. And once it's done, it's done. You just upload episodes from there on out. But you could use Captivate. Personally, I'm using Beehive now, although I don't know that there is much of an advertising management tool in there, but it really depends on your needs. If you think you're going to sell ads right at the outset, and by the way, they don't have to be ads for other people. Maybe they are sort of house ads, ads that you create to promote your own work there, inside your newsroom, or an edition coming out, or a special episode, whatever it might be. But that's only one part of distribution. So you get the audio to Apple, you get it to Spotify. You can also have the audio sent to YouTube, or you could just post the video to YouTube. When you post it to YouTube, you want to create a podcast, you can do that on the back end of YouTube and put it there. And then you've done what you need to do. You don't need to also upload audio. But if you remember at the beginning of this conversation, I talked about podcasts being a piece of pillar content. It's not just video, it's not just audio, it's short clips, it's a written article. Maybe it's a written article in many different formats. Maybe it is just a news story about the conversation, or maybe it's three things we learned from this conversation. There are many different ways to slice this pie, and you want to take advantage of all of them to extend the reach of your podcast content. And this goes back to perhaps asking yourself, why are you doing this? Why have a podcast? And for many folks, it may just be building awareness for your newsroom and the good work you're doing. But also, and I mentioned this when I was talking about Captivate and its ability to manage pre-roll and mid-roll ads, you know, a really great way to monetize the podcast is to incorporate your sales team in selling branded content opportunities. So you have your day-to-day news. Maybe you're talking about a big story. Maybe you're having a guest on. All great ideas for news podcasts, but maybe your sales team is working with businesses in the community, telling stories. They're not just advertisements where you're selling the whole time, but perhaps it's telling the story of the owner, telling the story of some of their employees or some of their best customers, or you know, um, work that they're particularly proud of, or issues. Maybe a law firm is one of your clients, and you need to keep folks up on the latest laws that have been passed. There are many, many opportunities for branded content that involves conversations. And that's what these podcasts are. They're just conversations that are consumable as content. If you recall last year, if you kept up with this, YouTube declared that for the first time ever, that watching podcasts on the couch was a primary way of consuming podcasts. Podcasts historically have been about 30 to 40 minutes max, because they are essentially, historically, podcasts were designed for the commute, whether it be the time that it takes you to drive to work or drive home, or the time that you spend on the subway, on the bus, on the train, whatever it might be. That's often where people would listen to podcasts, and the average of that time was usually 30 minutes. Thank you, Ryan. So, what have I failed to ask? What else would you like to mention? How would you wrap this up for us? So, I would say at that point, have a plan. Write it down. What are you going to do with this podcast? For example, let's say that you interview somebody who has achieved a big milestone in your community. I would say that you have the video that you post in full to YouTube. I would say that you post the full audio podcast to through your distribution tool to get to Apple, Spotify, and all the other sort of niche players there. But I would say have a story ready to go, written for your website. Write it by hand, or you could take the transcript from your podcast from Riverside. You could just copy transcript and maybe get started with an outline in a chat GPT and then write it from hand by hand there. Whatever your AI policy there is, you want to have a written story. Maybe it's just a recap, but something that's written that could have some SEO or AEO value in the way that you set it up. For example, you might have one story that just sort of reads like prose and another story that's just like three takeaways from this particular conversation. You have something written on your site. And then maybe take the video into now Riverside has a tool that will allow you to create what they call magic clips, short clips, but there is also a tool called Opus Clip that's really popular in the digital world to where you can add the YouTube URL to Opus Clip and it will use AI to guesstimate what your most popular clips would be. You go through, watch them, clean them up a little bit, and all of a sudden you have short clips that you can use from that podcast to draw people to the long form video on YouTube, to the audio on Apple or Spotify, and or to the story on your website. And I will tell you how I do that. I go to Canva and I create sort of an end screen card for my vertical videos that say catch the full conversation, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and then the URL of your site. Oh, and one more thing though, because there is distribution, but also there is redistribution. And I would say that giving your podcast multiple lives, maybe not 9 lives like a cat, but maybe 2 or 3 lives is super important. And that is you create the full video, the full audio, the written stories, one or two maybe, and then the short clips. But if it does decently well, even if it doesn't, find a reason after 30 days, after 60 days to repurpose that content. If it's not completely timely, if it's something that's a little more evergreen that can be shared after 30 or 60 days, find a way to repurpose it. In fact, find a way after 6 months or after a year. If it's something that's really, let's say that one of your clients in the newsroom is a nursery and it is gardening season, you probably are recording podcast content that could be used annually or perennially. See what I did there? Well, thank you, Ryan. Now I know what it feels like to be on both sides of the keep it local equation. But thank you. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to be on Keep It Local. It's the first time I've been a guest, and hopefully you'll invite me back at some point. And I hope folks will check out the LMII report. It is fairly informal. If you read it and have questions, I invite you to reach out to me at ryan.welton@localmedia.org. I would love to try to help you with whatever question you might have about your specific circumstance. But as I told you, there's a specific way I like to do it. And my recommendation to anybody is to find the way that you want to do it. Yes, it helps to follow some best practices, wear wired headphones if you can, have a decent mic. But outside of that, there are many, many ways to get this done um, professionally and with impact to your business. And I'll just go back to the why even start a podcast. It's not just to have a podcast to say that you have one. There are a lot of cynics and skeptics out there who are like, Ugh, why are you deviating from your mission by creating a podcast? It's not deviating. It is supplementary to what you do and providing not only your audience with a different way to consume you, whether it be audio, whether it be video. I will tell you, especially with the younger audience, there is an appetite for longer conversations, for more in depth reporting. So, maybe that's a surprise to you. But also, especially from a sales and revenue perspective, the amount of storytelling that can be done with clients that have real impact to them, podcasting is simply the most effective way to do that in 2026. And it could be a game changer for your entire sales department. And by the way, oftentimes, if done right, that content is actually really good content for editorial. I mean, you gotta demarcate the lines there between church and state, if you will. But it's just an effective content mechanism for both editorial and for business. On behalf of, well, myself, I'm Ryan Welton. Thank you for listening and watching to this episode of Keep It Local. Thank you for having me.